This episode of the D-Lew Podcast is brought to you by Happy Wrap. You ever wanted to design your very own gift wrapping paper? Now is your chance to do so. Whether it's for the holiday season, weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, no matter what the occasion calls for, you can use Happy Wrap to wrap your gifts. As a matter of fact, you can even design notebooks, greeting cards, gift tags, and so much more. You can sign up today at happy.thedlewpodcast.com and use the promo code DLEW to get your 10% discount at checkout. Again, that's happy.thedlewpodcast.com and use promo code DLEW to get your 10% discount at checkout. By Simpler Hair Color. Hey guys, are you tired of using that drugstore hair dye brand that isn't getting the job done? If you want to use a great product to cover those grays, have no fear, Simpler Hair Color is here. No mixing, no dripping, no mess. It's super easy to use, whether you're a beginner or a pro. Go to simpler.thedlewpodcast.com and use promo code DLEW10 for your 10% discount at checkout. Again, that's simpler.thedlewpodcast.com and use my promo code DLEW10 for your 10% discount at checkout. And by WWE Shop with Fanatics. Get your favorite WWE Superstars merchandise and wear them proud with superstars like the OTC Roman Reigns, Rhea Ripley, the Second City Saint CM Punk, John Cena, Main Event Jey Uso, the American Nightmare Cody Rhodes, and so many more. Oh, by the way, they got some really cool championship belts in there as well. So go to wrestling.thedlewpodcast.com. Again, that's wrestling.thedlewpodcast.com so you can go to WWE Shop with Fanatics. This podcast is a Believe Network and Siete production. To another edition of the D-Lew Podcast powered by Believe Network. I'm your host, Derrick T. Lewis, and I hope the week is treating you all absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to get right into it. This week's episode is my exclusive interview with the owner of East Coast Wrestling Association, ECWA. They've been around since 1967. And I'm actually a ring announcer there as well. But he's the owner there, but he's also the director and producer of the documentary that you can all see now on Prime Video entitled A Backyard in Delaware, the story of Jim Kettner's ECWA. And again, his name is Ryan Kavanagh. And we talk about early life, how he got into wrestling, how he became the owner of ECWA, and all that went into getting this documentary off the ground. And let's not wait any longer. My interview with Ryan Kavanagh starts right now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a man that is the owner of East Coast Wrestling Association, better known as ECWA, and he is also the director and executive producer of the documentary entitled A Backyard in Delaware, the story of Jim Kettner's East Coast Wrestling Association. It's the one and only Ryan Kavanagh. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you, man?
Oh, thanks for having me, Derrick. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. But like I said, I'm a ring, as you all know, guys, I am a ring announcer, not only for the world famous Monster Factory, but also for ECWA. And I've been on board since 2021. And when I was
The
asked,
absolute best, the best.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. But when you talk about the lineage of the company ECWA, going back to 1967, and I was going to ECWA as a fan when I moved to Delaware. And thanks to some friends of mine, and to kind of have a peek of the past, but also have a toe in regards to the current day. It's an honor and a privilege for me, to be a part of this company. And again, once again, I thank you publicly, for bringing me on board. But I want to talk about, Ryan Kavanagh, the human being, the man. So talk about family life growing up and just what the whole entire Ryan's world, so to speak. Talk about life growing up.
So I think like most wrestling fans, like I got bit pretty early by the wrestling bug as far back as I can remember. It's been there, right? Like it's I guess it's like being an alcoholic. It just you can never get rid of it, right? My earliest memories, I can remember professional wrestling. I just always wanted to do it. The one guy who's on our show, JD Luscious, was my next door neighbor, and we would
Hmm.
wrestle. It wasn't backyard wrestling; it was in front of our house. We had a like a wooden fence that was in between the two of our houses, and that was like our makeshift ropes.
Okay.
And then years later, got involved in backyard wrestling. Did that on TV for a number of years. Because of the backyard wrestling show, I got introduced to actual professionals who were on the independent level, and they were kind enough to train me and a couple of my friends, and then we in turn trained the rest of our friends, and then just kind of made a run at it that way. So it's a very like modern day story, right? Where everybody kind of comes from that world of backyard wrestling, and I know there's a lot of negativity towards backyard wrestling, but to me, it's no different than kids playing like touch football or going down the sand lot and playing baseball.
Right.
There's absolutely no difference. So I think there's a ton of wrestlers who all kind of started that way, and there's certainly no shame in it from my side of things.
I mean, think about guys that have been on television that started in the backyard, the Hardy Boys, how they started with the trampoline in their backyard
Sure.
and they started Omega and CM Punk, out in Chicago when they were doing the backyard thing. And then they ultimately end up getting trained. So to your point, it's no different, than playing street football, which is probably more dangerous because
Yeah.
there's no, you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
people are hitting on, there's cars coming, and you got to get out of the way because the moving car and everything. We're playing football, so I totally get what you're saying, and it's cool that everybody can share that experience. Regardless if it's backyard wrestling, going out to to the sandlot to play baseball. Kids being kids. So you did start your own company on World One Wrestling. So how did you get to the business side of pro wrestling?
Yeah. So that was a big pain to you know, because you've been around New Jersey independent scene for a while.
Hmm.
There's a lot of bad promoters in Jersey, and there may have been more when I was trying to get in. There were just so many
Hmm.
buildings that just didn't want to have anything to do with professional wrestling because they had been burned before by so many of these
Right.
companies that were running at the time. So it was a real pain to try to find a building and find a ring and like all that. Those resources weren't all there at the time, where now it's much more open. So we started with it was basically just a bunch of my friends. Our first show we had Jay Lethal, Homicide, Doink the Clown, and Steve Carino booked as far as names. The rest were all my friends.
Hmm.
Of those four people, only Steve Carino showed up. Um, and because of that, we developed a relationship with Carino and eventually became World One Wrestling. At the time, we were called B4W because that was the name of our backyard promotion.
Right.
Over time, it would become World One Wrestling, which was his promotion that he started in like 2004 or something like that in Pennsylvania, and it just didn't work out.
Okay.
But a lot of the credit goes to Steve. I everything I learned in wrestling in those early years was from Steve, Mike Keener, John Finnegan. All those guys were they just went out of their way to show me things when they really had there was no benefit to them to teach me anything. They couldn't help themselves, right? Like I just love people like that who they can't help but teach the younger generation, and they were so kind to do that for me in those early years, and it really meant a lot.
Yeah, you mentioned Carino. I actually had an opportunity to spend about a good 10 minutes with Steve when I got to cover WrestleMania 2 years ago in Los Angeles.
No,
I was
awesome.
getting ready for the press junket. I think it was day two of the press junket. I'm in the lobby. There's wrestlers walking all over the place. And I just made it a point to introduce myself because of my affiliation with the Monster Factory. He knew Dan, he knew quite a few of the guys that were there. And he took the time to talk to me about the psychology of pro wrestling and how sometimes it is overthought just a little bit too much instead of the bare bones of what it is and just kind of keep it simple. You know what I'm saying? And just that interaction, I'll be forever appreciative, to Steve for taking it because he didn't have to talk to me, but
All
he
right.
did. You know what I mean? So being that you had that same experience, I can share the same sentiments.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough that early on, we did a road trip. It was me, my friend Kubi, Steve, and actually Colby. Colby, who slept the whole time, by the way, the entire drive to like Chicago. He was young, he was like 12 or something like that. And
Hmm.
Steve the whole time was just like dropping all this like I wish I had a camera or like there was a way to record all of it, like just
Hmm.
all this incredible knowledge and these fantastic stories, the whole drive there. And then to see him work in front of a crowd one night, maybe it was a family friendly crowd. I don't really remember the specifics. And the next night, it was a completely different audience. It was like this bar, these drunk guys, and just switch his whole persona just enough. It was still Steve Carino both nights, but he played to every crowd that he was in front of. And I think that's something that can get lost over time, where everybody just kind of used to playing the same thing no matter where they
Same old,
go.
same
But
old. Right.
yeah, but those guys that came up during that period, they knew how to work every single room they were in, and that's definitely a skill set that I admire. Just a
Yeah.
fantastic wrestler, and
It's
his
just
son's got it too. Colby's got it too. So
yeah, but
learn from
also
the
too, it's
best.
just really it's well knowing it's really knowing your audience. You know what I mean? Whether it's wrestling, if you're a recording artist, understanding who you're performing in front of. If you
Right.
have and that's how you gain experience and then knowledge to pass on, just like you were saying how he was passing that knowledge to you. That's super, super important.
Sure.
So, you're doing the world one wrestling thing, everything's going great. How did you end up being the owner of the famed legendary ECWA? How did that come to
Yeah.
be?
So I had helped Mike and Joe, who were running. I think Mike owned it primarily, but I had helped Mike and Joe because of my relationship with Finnegan over the years. Whenever
Hmm.
they needed help, they needed somebody to videotape, or they needed
Hmm.
somebody to help out with music or whatever. So I had been to a couple of their shows over the years, um, and I believe at one point we had talked to them about purchasing ECWA, and the deal just didn't work out. It wasn't gonna. It didn't make sense for us. It didn't make sense for them. And the timing just wasn't right.
Hmm.
So, we parted ways, no big deal. And then, I would still go and help them out and stuff like that from time to time. And randomly, I was on a flight heading to, I was getting on, ready to get on a flight to Miami, and it was like my birthday, actually. I was just flying
Okay.
for work down to Miami, and I get a text from Mike Tartaglia saying, "Hey, do you still want to get ECWA?" And I was like, "What? Like, where is this coming from?" I'm like, I'm getting on a plane. I gotta call you back. So basically, I called him back and we just kind of worked everything out and got to something that made sense for everybody. And that was really it. I think he was just at a point where he didn't want to do it anymore. Um, and we were at a point where we were kind of doing pretty well for, our small show. Um, and it just made sense. Everything just kind of lined up.
Wow. So just for timeline purposes, obviously Jim Kettner had sold ECWA to Mike, and then now he sold it to you. So were you
Correct.
aware about the lineage of ECWA at the time that you purchased it?
Yeah, so I thought of everybody thinks of ECWA immediately and they say Super 8, right? Like that's the big
Right.
thing is the Super 8 tournament. And
Hmm.
I get that. I get that. And that's certainly a big consideration. But it wasn't just that. It was, I had thought for so many years, all that footage, all the stuff from Jim's time, just hadn't been out there. And you're talking about not just the Super 8, but you're talking about those Super 8 kind of guys. You're also talking about those character guys, like somebody like Ooh La La.
Hmm.
Like all that stuff just wasn't out there. It wasn't, you looked online, there was like almost nothing. And that was kind of my big thing was like there's a whole backstory here that we could get into and kind of talk about. But I didn't know, I had never met Jim Kettner prior to then. Um, and I only knew Mike from, participating on his shows and helping out from there. So I really didn't have I had never been to an ECWA show while Jim Kettner was running, put it that way.
Wow. I mean, as a fan, attending those shows at the Boys and Girls Club and or down on Route 40, let me tell you, like it was an event. When those shows, when every wrestler showed up there, and I mean it was a hell of a crowd. You know what I mean? They
Sure.
always drew pretty big. And they were very loyal to those stars, whether you were heel or baby, no matter what, like those fans came there to support their favorites. And I mean, it was an honor for me to, like I said, to have experienced that as a fan and seeing so many legends come in and out of those doors. I mean, there was a guy by the name of Frederick of Hollywood who we all know
Hmm.
as Darren Young, that
Yep.
went on to do some amazing things at WWE. I was actually at his last ECWA event before he moved to Florida to go to
Wow.
FCW. I was there for that. So
That's awesome.
to see some of those guys that's coming in and out of those doors and to see them do some incredible things was awesome. So now that you're the owner, you're the booker, all these other things, you're editing all the shows. How are you able to juggle all of those responsibilities for ECWA?
Um, Not well. No, I think I've always been good with time management. I think I can set realistic goals, and I I'm one of those people who, if I set a timeline, like I hold myself to it. Even though I know, like, if I said I got to have this show edited by this date, it's going to happen. Even
Right.
though nobody else knows that date or when it's going to happen, I just am very strict about stuff like that. So, I have three kids, so it's basically, if they're in bed, then I have time to edit, and I can, use it on my laptop upstairs, come down here, edit when I can, and luckily, a lot of that stuff was during COVID, right? Like when we took
Mm,
over, so I was always, working from home, so I could pop in a tape, convert it to digital, all while working, right? Like just
hmm.
let it run for 2 hours and 30 minutes, and then when that was done, just go over, pop in the next tape, and just keep hundreds of hours of footage from Kettner's time that just had never been digitized. Um, so, luckily all that stuff was able to be done kind of during COVID. It was like almost like the perfect timing to get all that stuff done and out of the way. And now it's
Wow.
digitized for forever. You know what I mean?
Amazing, amazing. So when you talk about, bringing talent in and everything, what's the criteria you use when you're bringing in new talent to the roster?
To me, at this point in my life, the most important thing is that they get along with everybody on the roster and that everybody enjoys working with them. Above all else, you've seen some of our guys, right? Like what people can do in the ring is really a small percentage of it. How the crowd reacts to them, how the crowd relates to them, all of that stuff is far more important to me. Now, go 20 years back, when I was 20 years old, all I wanted to see was, Low Key and Amazing Red or Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, like
Right,
those
right,
kind of
right.
matches. But now I know that doesn't, all those matches back to back to back to back is not necessarily the show that I'm willing to watch anymore. And I think there's a far greater percentage of wrestling fans who feel the same way now than maybe 20 years ago, where they want to see the characters and they want to see, like, the bloodline that they're doing in WWE is a perfect example. You're spreading out an angle across, I don't know how many years they're doing it. I don't really keep up with it that well, but several years, and you extrapolate that to how many matches there's actually been. It's probably this much wrestling to this much storyline.
Right.
So there's a much bigger audience out there for an ooh la la. You know what I mean, on our roster, than almost anybody else, and that's why to this day, he one of the oldest guys on the roster and the most over, out of almost anybody.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what we look for is how they get along with our crew. They got to fit in, right? Because we're only doing this 4 or 5 times a year, and it's like a big to do for a lot of our guys because they gotta leave the wife and kids, and they gotta make a lot of plans in advance to be there, and we don't want anything to ruin that day. And we've gotten rid of people who are probably really great wrestlers because their attitude wasn't right or they didn't gel well with the rest of the crew. Um, Having said all that, I think for our show and the style that we're doing, I think we're putting on the best wrestling shows on the independents, far and above. Like, there's nobody who leaves our show disappointed, and we've been doing that really well for the last 3 years, and that's no credit to me. That's all the guys and girls on the show. I can't take credit for it as much as I would love to. Um, Nobody leaves our show disappointed. Everybody's excited to come back. The crowds are super into everything. They're hot all night, and you really can't ask for anything more than that. You know what I mean? As far as a promoter or a booker.
Yeah, and I've experienced it, like I said, just the highs and lows of the night and just the way the matches are spread out and they're put there for a reason. And like you said, if you're just doing the oohs and ahs all night long, eventually everyone's going to get numb to it because like, all right, I've seen this match already. I've seen
Sure,
this match
sure,
already. So if you're giving
sure.
them more variety of some of the character stuff, that really keeps the engagement going on throughout the entire night, and that's really important.
And and what's cool about that is I didn't know until I started digitizing all these tapes. I didn't know. I don't know why my camera is zooming like this. This is crazy to me. It's very distracting. Um, I didn't know that that's the kind of because that's the show we've always done, right? Where it's kind of like the three act circus. So if I put my hand up, will it zoom out? I can't figure out why it's doing that. Our show's always kind of been the three act circus, right?
Hmm.
Where there's hopefully there's something for everybody on the show, right? And hopefully multiple things for a lot of people. I didn't realize till I started digitizing the tapes that that's much closer to the shows that Jim Kettner was running all those years ago. I thought it was just always, for lack of a better term, the super
The
indie.
Super 8, right.
You know what I mean? It was always that Super 8 style match where it's everything is like the top indie guys, like the Reckless Youth, the Ace Starlings, the Crowbar, like all those guys, one after another. But no, it's a lot closer. There was a lot more characters, and people realized there was in-depth storylines, and they carried over from show to show to show. And so many promotions at that time, especially during the '90s, were doing spot shows where I might be the champion on one show, and you go to another town, I'm in a tag team. You know what I mean? With no title, and some of the other guys got my belt. You know what I mean? Like the championships meant nothing, the storylines meant nothing, but for Kettner and ECWA, that stuff carried over, especially once they started going to St. Matt's, which is probably where you saw them, if not the later buildings.
Yeah, I saw them more or less at the Boys and Girls Club. That's when I started
Okay,
going
where
to,
we did the August
to the
show.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
Okay.
that's where I was
Oh,
going to those shows.
that's a real full circle moment for you then, huh?
Absolutely. And I
That's
was
pretty
very, very
cool.
proud. Yeah, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you had mentioned something about, the indie circuit and sometimes, with the promotions, you know, how do you maintain stability in an oversaturated market for independent pro wrestling?
I don't know. We have a great team. Our guys work super hard to get the fans there, and I think the fans know how much all the wrestlers truly love being on the show. And I know that seems like a small thing, but I always liken it to like Saturday Night Live, right? Like the best sketches are the ones where they're laughing, right?
Right.
Where they're enjoying themselves. That's the ones that everybody always goes back and watches. And when you know the wrestlers are enjoying themselves, that makes you want to come back. You're part of the team. Like our fans are very much part of the show. We can't do it without them. Like quite literally can't do it without them. And we let them know that. And I think that's what makes the difference. But if I had all the answers to that, I we'd be running, multiple times. No, we wouldn't because I can't do it, but we'd be running a lot more, but we really wouldn't because I just don't have the time for it. But yeah, I think that's the key to it is all our roster really puts in the work and sets up the relationship with our fans and our audience, and they know how much these guys all love doing this.
Yeah, it's a genuine love. Like every time I show up to the building, it's like it's all positive vibes. Everybody wants to be there. Everybody wants to contribute and making the best show possible. And that's why I admire about ECWA. And when I was a fan, because I felt that vibe, from the wrestlers, and then now being on the inside, it's the same sentiments too. So that's super, super important, element to have when you're having a team like that in order to make this whole entire thing work. But I want to talk about the documentary. The documentary, "A Backyard in Delaware," the story of Jim Kettner's ECWA.
Hmm.
It's an hour and 36 minutes long. Me and my girlfriend, had an opportunity to come down to the initial screening in Central Jersey back in December, the first Sunday in December, and I have to tell you, just being on production for that, I'm just, shooting the behind the scenes footage at the Night of Legends show in August, and just the stories that were told, from all the wrestlers from so many years. I mean, it was, man, it brought some tears to my eyes to talk about the struggles, and again, because we always want to talk about the highs and that's all great, but there's so many backstories to a lot of the wrestlers, and especially for Jim. So I wanted to ask you, when was it that you decided to start to work on this documentary?
Yeah, so I've always kind of made like, and I think I mentioned this in the Q&A, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but
No, 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 it's cool. Cool.
we I always did documentaries on like our own stuff, like my friends and I and what we had done, and I had told our story like ad nauseum, right? So I talked to a number of my friends and just said, yeah, I want to do something different. I want to tell somebody else's story, and it was right in front of me. I just didn't know how to get in touch with Jim Kettner. So long story short, I ended up finally through mutual friends got a hold of him and was able to meet up with him and finally convince him to let me put this thing together. And he was more than helpful every step of the way. But as I got into it, not knowing what the story was, right? Because you always heard since 1967, but it was always with that asterisk, right? Like it was like from 1967. Like everything in wrestling, you always kind of wonder what's true and what's not. So I didn't know what the story was.
Hmm.
And after walking away from talking to Jim, spending a couple hours with him and explaining what the story was to one of my friends, he was like, "Well, I thought you wanted to do something different." And I said, "I do. That's why I want to do this." He goes, "It's the exact same story as us." And I was like, "Holy crap, you're right." Like they had the same path. Obviously, they went to much greater heights with everything, but they had the same story as my friends and I. They basically started in a backyard. They had a professional who came in and showed them the way. They got their first indoor show. They got on TV. Then they finally started doing professional shows. Like it was the same. It was like the blueprint of
Right.
what to do, and we copied it without knowing, that we were copying it. So yeah, the whole thing was like kind of a journey because it was a story I was telling that I didn't know what the story was when I got into it. But it was
Hmm.
something I thought was important to tell. I'm a big believer in history. I'm a big believer in professional wrestling, and I think pro wrestling history is very important and it matters.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Um, so yeah, so like I thought this was a story that deserved to be told, and I'm glad I was able to tell it. And I'm glad everybody who was involved allowed me to tell that story.
Yeah, and when you mentioned earlier, when you had to reach out to a couple of mutual friends to get in contact with Jim, what was his initial reaction when you had presented this idea to him about, hey, I want to do a documentary about the company? What was his initial reaction in the
I
beginning?
think hesitant. I think hesitant, right? Like maybe there had been people over the years who had tried to dismiss some of the stuff he had done.
Mm,
Maybe even the people who were part of the new version of ECWA after he left. And not necessarily the top people there, but I think people who work there and stuff like that. Um, and that's just stuff I've heard, not directly from him, but from people over the years. So maybe there was some hesitance there. And he didn't. I'm just some random guy calling him in the middle of COVID. So he didn't know who the hell I was, or what my plans were, or if I'm just trying to get the Jim Kettner seal of approval, and get my picture with Kettner to show that I'm running ECWA now. He didn't know. So it probably took more convincing than I'm remembering, but I don't remember it taking that much, unless I'm just remembering conversations of just talking with them. You know what I mean? Like it didn't seem like I had to push too hard, but I could be just remembering it wrong, remembering it nicer.
Right. So overall, how long was production for as far as the filming, filming of the interviews, the editing, all those things? How long did it take from beginning to end?
3 years, 3 years altogether. Yeah, I mean, if you don't include the maybe the year and a half I spent digitizing everything, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't really consider that part of the documentary, even though it ultimately technically is.
Hmm.
But there was probably 6 months of just kind of talking with Jim and figuring out what the story was and hearing it from him and who we could potentially talk to. I have a binder behind me in this somewhere in this book shelf right there of
Okay.
handwritten notes from Jim. All the people, a list in alphabetical order, hundreds of names of people who worked for him over the years. Like he just showed up one day with it. Like that's how detail oriented and organized um, and mindful he is. And that's not something that he just had off the top of his head or he had written down. He spent like days figuring out, okay, this guy, and then would periodically, text me or call me, hey, I forgot this guy. Can you please add this guy? Just it never stopped working. And he always likes to say, like, he couldn't do wrestling in the modern world, but he can, and he did. So
Yeah.
like he absolutely still 100% like has the whatever the gene is for it, he's still got it.
Yeah. It's crazy because even outside of ECWA, whenever the WWE was in town, Jim Kettner would be basically in charge,
Hmm.
in the back.
Yeah.
He was there. Like Jim, like when they were in Delaware at the Bob Carpenter Center down here.
Yep.
Like I would see Jim there all the time. It was like he's well known by so many people. But when it came to the wrestlers, the former talent, managers or whatever the case may be, how difficult was it looking and finding these people?
It was at first like all I really had was Ooh La La, right? Like he's the only one I had that was still from that world. So it's like I kind of leaned on him at first, and then like maybe he put me in touch with 3 to 5 to 6 people, and then those 5 6 people put me in touch with 5 or 6 people, and it just kind of
Mm.
spider webbed. Now obviously there's people you couldn't get, and then there was people who were like the dream scenario, like, oh, it'd be really cool if we could get the Hardy Boys, or Jerry Lynn, but there's no chance. It'd be great if we could interview Bennett, but he's with WWE. It's just not going to happen. And through all these different circumstances, partially because of Jim's connections, and the amount of respect that people have for him, we were able to get pretty much everybody we wanted to interview. Then there was people who didn't want to do it and stuff like that, or couldn't, and things just didn't line up. But yeah, we interviewed way more people than I expected to. It's normal documentary. I think you're supposed to interview about 20 people, and we were over 100.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it was a production.
So, and I know when you're talking to wrestlers, especially some of the old guard, I can't even imagine the amount of stories that probably couldn't make air. But if you could talk about some of the funny stories that you experienced during the production and filming of this documentary.
So I thought there was a couple of good ones. The most interesting, which is kind of in the credits at the end, there was a guy named Dazzling Donnie Love, and I was just kind of wrapping up, and I had my one camera recording still. And he had mentioned, when he showed me his old gear, and he was like, when I was talking to the funeral director, about, what I need to do, once I'm dead to, get me in in my casket. And I was like, what? Hang on, we're not going to just gloss over this, are we? I'm like, so you're going to wear that when you die? He goes, yeah, I got it all worked out. It's in my will. Like that's how much like ECWA and those characters and those people meant to a lot of these guys. For some of these guys, a lot of Jim's crew were local guys, right? Not
Hmm.
unlike what we have, guys who only work for ECWA currently. That's the exact same setup they had back then. People who didn't want to go outside of that ECWA bubble. So for some of these guys, it was the absolute greatest time of their life. And getting to see that and getting to see them talk about it, like at first they're always kind of like, oh, what's this going to be about? Because everybody thinks Dark Side of the Ring, right? Like everybody thinks you're there to, you know what I mean?
Right.
To kind of,
Yeah.
so everybody's kind of got that in the back of their head. And then once you ask the questions and you show them that you know what you're talking about and you know who they are, you know who they're feuded with, and all that stuff, they just light up, and the stories just kind of fall out, and even stuff they didn't know they remembered just starts spilling out, and you just get like some of the best stuff. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of just interviews that hopefully we find some kind of way to get those all out there over the years, but just a lot of great stories from just a lot of great people who did a lot of cool stuff over the years.
Talk about some of the highs and lows during this production because this is a lot of stuff we're talking about. Hundreds of hours of interviews, then you're traveling, to these people, whether it's their homes or wherever the case may be. Talk about some of those highs and lows and you being at the helm of this thing and trying to put this all together.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's always I'm like neurotic about things, right? Like, so anytime I filmed an interview, I'm filming it with two cameras, if not three. I'm filming it with like three different audio sources. Sometimes I'm recording with my phone too. I'm just always assuming something is going to fail, right? So I have a
Hmm.
backup of a backup of a backup. So like I always was waiting for that to be an issue where I got home and I missed something or something didn't work. And luckily that never happened. So to me, it was kind of like a high coming back after every interview and seeing, we got everything we wanted. I would say the only low I would say about the entire process is we did an interview with two guys who were a part of the Frame Boys Club, Big Bill Page and
Hmm.
Smenkowski, Super Smenkowski was his name. And they were a big part of ECWA. They kind of had their own thing. Kettner had his thing, and they kind of merged, which is exactly what happened with me and my friends. I had my thing. My friend Ricky had his thing, and we kind of merged. All our friends kind of merged, and we became a bigger promotion. Exact same thing happened with Kettner and Bill Page and Smenkowski. And right before the Legend show, Smenkowski went in the hospital, so he wasn't able to come to the show. And maybe a month after the August show, he passed away and never got to see the film.
Hmm.
So if you saw, I posted a small tribute, so at least his family got to see, some of his interview and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I wish he would have, and that was kind of in the back of my head too. Like I did, because a lot of these guys are older and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and you're always at danger in the danger of some of this stuff just getting lost to time, right? Like people pass away, it just happens, and that was always in the back of my head. Like I hope nobody passes away before they get a chance to see the movie, and unfortunately that it did happen. But he did see parts of it. At least he did see the big part that him and Bill Page were in, because it was still slightly unedited, but we used it in the hype for the Legend show. So
Okay.
he was shown that while he was in the hospital, and that was a majority of what he was in the documentary. So I have that like small comfort, but I wish he got to see the whole thing.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, man.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear about that. I was actually at a show. It was in a documentary, but I was actually at this show where you had presented Jim Kettner with an ECWA championship belt. Talk about that gesture because what I've known about Jim for as long as I've known him is that he doesn't take himself seriously and he always puts the credit to everybody else. He always put the credit to everybody else. But it seemed like this honor was like, hey man, we're giving you your flowers. Talk about that gesture of you presenting that to him for all the work that he did for so many people for so many years.
Yeah, I mean, like, just think about it, like, historically, again, pro wrestling history, and I feel like that really matters. Historically, he ran the promotion for 40 something years, 47 years, something like that,
Hmm.
sold it, and hadn't been to a show in 15 years. Any of the ECWA shows. He
Right.
maybe had gone to, Lisa did Right Coast Pro out in Delaware, and he helped out a time or two out there. Never had been to an ECWA show again. So it's basically like, he put his kid in a raft, let it downstream, and then was never able to see it again. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so for him to, tell me he wanted to come to the show, um, and then actually, be there, I knew we had to do something, right? Like, absolutely, because like it's a tremendous honor the fact that he was coming, and the fact that it was also the Super 8. You know what I mean? Like he was
Right.
there for, what everybody would consider, I think, his best creation. Probably the thing he's most well known for. So like, add all that stuff together, and it was just like it was a no brainer to me. Like you honor the guy who deserves honoring, and by all means, that's Kettner.
Yeah, man, for sure. We talked about it a little bit, but let's get into it, man. The Night of Legends event that took place on August 3rd, I believe, at the Boys and Girls Club in Newark, Delaware, not too far from where I live. In putting that event together, because we were really honoring Jim Kettner's ECWA and guys like Low Key, Christopher Daniels, the Black Nature Boy Scoot Andrews, you know what I mean? Like so many of these legendary figures. Obviously, Ooh La La was there. And the Cheetah Master, which got a
Hmm.
huge, huge ovation. He was so loved by everybody. What did it mean to bridge the gap for the old generation into the current generation of today's ECWA?
Everything. Absolutely. I'm a huge nostalgia person. Part of the reason I wanted to be involved in ECWA was because of the nostalgia aspect. I love those legend shows, those reunion shows. I know sometimes like you look at some guys' last matches and you're like, okay, it can look a little sad. I get that. I still love looking back at those ECW reunion shows years ago,
Hmm.
when they were running, the arena when it was the Alhambra Arena or whatever. I love those shows. I always loved the Legends show. And as I was wrapping up the documentary, I'm like, I can get Kettner to do a reunion show. I know it. And as I got more and more into it, I started realizing, number one, he doesn't want to do it, which is a problem. But as I got into it, I was like, I need that for the ending. Like that is the ending. Everyone I've interviewed has talked about, I wish we got a chance to honor Jim. I wish we had a final show. I wish we got to say goodbye to the fans. Whatever it all was the same theory, the same idea in theory,
Right.
which was we wanted to do one more thing. And not everybody's going to wrestle and all that, but
Right.
we didn't get the farewell. Everybody always looks for closure in life for everything, for all aspects of your life, but
Agreed.
especially something you enjoyed doing so much. So I put together at the end of the movie. There's kind of a compilation of maybe 10 minutes where everybody just kind of says something about ECWA and Kettner, and I had that, but it was larger. It was like 20 minutes long,
Hmm.
originally, and I'm like, I got to chop this down because it just goes on for too long. It's like a quarter of the movie at this point.
Right,
I'm
right,
like,
right, right,
before
right.
before I cut it down, I'm gonna show Jim, and after he watches it, I'm gonna ask him to do the reunion show. So we always met up at a restaurant. So we met there, we ate. I was like, I got something for you before we go, and I had an iPad and I played it for him, and yeah, he got emotional, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, so I'd like to do the Legend show, and I kind of did my pitch, whatever it was at the time. I didn't even really plan what I was going to say. I just said what I was thinking,
Hmm.
and he's like, oh, look, I would love to say yes. I know that would help you, but I don't want to be that old guy who just does the thing to do the thing. He goes, if you want to do it, I will help you out in anything you need, and I'll be there, whatever you need. I'm like, if that's as good as we're gonna get, then let's do it. And then you fast forward to August 3rd. Every single match, every single segment, every single thing you saw was put together by Jim Kettner. So, and he even said in the weeks leading up to it, he was like, "Damn you!"
He fell for it
So,
again.
well, it was like because I would throw out an idea, and I'd be like, "How about this?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, that'd be good." And then like a day later, he'd call me back like, "I thought of something a little bit better." He wouldn't say that, but he would say, "Hey, what if we did this instead?" I'm like, "Yep, love it. Let's write it down." And that's how everything went. And that whole show was a love letter to Jim Kettner's ECWA put together by the guy himself. And I don't think you can. I don't think you can top that.
No, and it's crazy because I got word. I mean, you had said this is no disrespect for you, Derek, but this is going to be a legend show, a throwback show.
Hmm.
So, you can film footage. I'm like, sure. And the old adage in pro wrestling, always bring your gear with you.
Right,
And
right.
I remember Will Strauss, who's our commentator, he was like, I'm gonna need you to do the Hall of Fame presentation with me. I'm like, sure, it's not a problem. And I think after that, he was like, so it looks like I'm gonna be on commentary by myself. Can you do commentary with me? I'm just like, I guess I'll be doing commentary for the
Yep.
Legends show. So it was just really cool to be a small part in such a huge event. I mean, that place was packed.
Yeah.
I
We
mean,
started we started 40 minutes late because we couldn't get everybody in quick enough.
it,
Like it was, and I never start late.
no, 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 no. You're very, very
Yeah.
punctual when it comes to starting on time and ending on time and everything. But for something like that, I mean, I heard the line was like going down the street. Like
Yeah.
that's how monumental this event was because people were clamoring to see those old stars. And I mean, that just really goes to show you that the nostalgia still works when it's
Yeah.
done right. When it's done right, it always works. It always, always works. So, the documentary itself, has it been submitted to any film festivals? And if so, which ones have they been submitted to?
I did some, I have not checked. We may have been accepted. I have not checked in months. So I have to do that. That's a good reminder. I submitted to maybe three or four. I got accepted to a New York one. I know that because it was before the screening, and I have not logged into that website since then. So we may have been accepted into other festivals, but I have no idea. I do need to look that up. So maybe we're in other film festivals.
As someone that has submitted for film festivals for like my music videos and everything, I totally understand because
Yeah,
you're
I just
constantly
forgot about it.
submitting. Right. I trust me. There's some that I guess I myself I got accepted. I'm like, oh, cool, awesome.
Yeah.
So that's that. But so when this eventually becomes available for everyone to see, what do you think that the people will take away from it? How do you think they'll internalize it once they see this in its entirety?
I think the immediate response is, I wish he didn't stop running. I think that's what so many of the wrestlers thought. Um, I think that's what a lot of people will feel. Especially for the people who weren't there during that time. It's like you're homesick for a place you've never lived, right? Like
Hmm.
I wish I got to, and I feel that way. Like I wish I got to go to St. Matt's or any of those shows and feel that energy and feel that environment. I just, same thing with ECW. I was never at an ECW show. So that's part of it. And then I think for the people who were there, that's a whole different emotional experience that I can't even fathom. Like those people lived it. They were there every month. They knew those guys and those girls, and they knew that staff, and they knew that ring and that building. They know what it smelled like, what it felt like. Everything is so there for them. So I can't imagine what that's like. But just to be able to, in the small things I was able to do because of the documentary, like visiting St. Matthew's Parish and going in there and filming inside and visiting a lot of these places and going inside, um, that was something I never thought I'd get a chance to do, especially because St. Matt's is not the same building. But to be able to
Right.
go there and go there with Kettner, like that's crazy to me. Um, so yeah, so like we were fortunate to do a lot of cool stuff, and I hope that the same feelings I felt will be transmitted through the film. And I'm sure everyone will have a different reaction to it, but that's kind of what I hope is people get that real good, feel good feeling that you can only get from professional wrestling.
There's no other feeling like it. And I've been watching wrestling for 43 years, and the same feeling I got when I was 4 years old is the same feeling that I have today as a fan. And even when I'm in the ring, doing my ring announcer stuff, it's just it's an incredible business to
Gets
be a
us
part
every
of,
time. That's
man.
why we all come back. That's why we all come
Absolutely.
back.
Absolutely. Speaking of the Super 8, obviously we got to talk some business. March 22nd is the Super 8 tournament. I know there's been some names that have been unveiled. I know GKM was one of them. I worked with him before. Shout out to GKM, and I can't wait to work with you. Talk about some of the ones who's submitted for it, and who's some of the names that hasn't been announced yet.
So we had this year we didn't leave the form up as long as we did in previous years, and the reason we did that is because in previous years we got close to like 1,000 submissions, and it just became this bear to get through and actually watch a match from each person. So it got to be like you're judging people off promo pictures, and it's like that's not really the way to do it. So I think we only left the form up for a week or two this time. We were still saddled with about 300 submissions, I think it was.
Okay.
So they came in real quick this time around, which was it's still a lot. And we were able to kind of whittle it down and figure out the people we're looking for, and what's the story we're looking to tell, and there's a lot that goes into it each year. Um, but basically, we kind of knew some people that we wanted. First off, it's just a matter of, did they submit their info and then trying to match up. Okay, they're in there. And maybe there's a couple people we didn't get to last year that we wanted in. And I think people are going to be really excited once they see the 8 participants this year. It's a diverse class. Um, and I think it'll be a great event. And there's going to be a lot of outside of the tournament, we're going to have some exciting stuff too. So it's going to be a really fun show. It's one of those shows that's like a bucket list show if you're a wrestling fan. At some point in your life, you got to go see a Super 8 tournament. It's an absolute must.
Yes, indeed. So again, ladies and gentlemen, if you can go to ecwawrestling.com and
Yep.
you can get your tickets, because I'm telling you right now, don't wait till the 11th hour to get tickets for the Super 8, because it will sell out quick. Again, Saturday night, March 22nd, bell time is 7 p.m. Doors open at 6:30, and make sure that you get there.
Yeah, can we talk about one other show real quick?
Absolutely.
We have I'm kind of involved in this other show with the we were talking about nostalgia, and that's why I think it's important to bring this show up. There
Mhm.
was a promotion in the early '90s called the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, founded by Joel
Yes, I
Goodhart.
just I just saw the video for that. Please, by all means.
Yes, yeah. So I made some videos for this. I'm helping them promote this event. It's put on by Joel Goodhart. It was one of those promotions. It was truly the first super independent company. We used the term super indie early
Super
on
indie, right? Yeah.
in the show. You're talking about Abdullah the Butcher, Bruiser Brody wrestling in these matches. They had a battle of the Bam Bams one time. Bam Bam Terry Gordy versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Just these dream matches, one after another. They did one show where it was 3 times in one night with a different stipulation each time. Eddie Gilbert versus Cactus Jack, and the final one was a cage match. And then you had all like these TWA originals, people like uh, Johnny Hotbody, Tony Stetson, Glenn Osborne, all these people who like paved the way for the early ECW and Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Right.
So they're putting on a show, and again, because we were speaking of nostalgia, I think this is going to be a really cool one that a lot of people are going to want to see. It's going to be held at the I call it the ECW Arena. It's the 2300 Arena. And there's actually a convention that goes along with it too. It's at they're calling it WrestleCon because Joel Goodhart used to host a radio show called Wrestling Radio,
Hmm.
and they're doing the convention early on, and then the show and the evening. And just hearing some of the surprise, and I haven't heard all of them because I'm not booking the show, but hearing some of the surprises they've got for fans, you're not going to want to miss this show. And if you've ever seen a Joel Goodhart show or listened to any of his interviews, he'll be the first one to tell you he just threw money out there. He didn't care if he made money. He just threw it out there, and that's what that's the style he liked to do. If there was a match he wanted to see, he didn't care what it cost, and he always likes to say he overpaid everybody. But those matches that he had back in that time period, they're still being shown on YouTube. They still get thousands of views when they go online. So all that stuff and just this show is just going to be a lot of fun. And I have no financial stake in this, by the way. I know I'm selling it pretty hard, but I'm telling you, if you're a wrestling fan, you're gonna want to see it. I think it's that important.
When is the date and the bell time for that?
Yeah, that's May 3rd. I believe the bell time is 7 p.m. for that. But if you check out 2300arena.com, they have all the ticket information right there, and all the tickets are pretty reasonable. I was on there the other day, and everything looks really reasonable. But I'm telling you, once they start announcing some stuff, and then there's plenty of stuff they're not going to announce that's just going to happen, you're just not going to want to miss that. And, to be in the ECW arena, I mean, come on. Who doesn't want to be there?
Haven't
If you're a
performed
wrestling fan.
there. Haven't performed there in 2022 for Monster Factory because they were filming our docu series that's on
Yeah,
Apple TV, and step in the arena, and that was the largest crowd I had ever performed in front of, and just to
yeah.
be there, I did a pitch stitch of the main event of the first ECW pay-per-view, Barely Legal '97, the triple threat match,
Oh, yeah.
and I did a pitch stitch of that and the Fatal Four Way match. That was the main event of Step in the Arena, and I
Oh,
was in
nice,
it.
nice.
And it was an honor for me to even share that picture because I'm just like I'm honoring the past. I'm honoring the ones that
Right.
paved the way. And just like I love our legends. I appreciate our legends more now because they're
Yeah,
all passing away. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
like I want to make sure that we give them their flowers, while they're here, and to
Absolutely.
appreciate how much they mean to us as fans. Where we can say, "Hey, we watched you on television. We watched you live in an arena. No matter what size the crowd. Thank you for putting your body on the line to entertain." So, by all
Yeah.
means, I will definitely check. I will definitely check that out, and I'll be promoting that as well on all my social
Yeah.
media once it
Yeah,
comes
we're gonna
across
have
my
an
desk.
ECWA match actually on that show. Darius Carter has said he wants to wave the ECWA flag in the ECW arena. So I don't know who his opponent's going to be, but I know we're going to be represented on that show, which is beyond cool for me. So like that's another reason I'm super excited about this show, but that's a selfish reason.
No, I mean, hey, listen, if ECWA is being represented in the show, hey, you should be
Sure.
excited about that. You should be
Yeah.
happy. Absolutely. So before we get out of here, if you can just tell the people where you can find, ECWA on all social media platforms.
Sure. It's ECWA 1967, the year it was founded. So everything is 1967. ECWA 1967 across everything.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much, for giving me your
Sure.
time,
Thank you for
to be
having
able
me,
to
man.
talk about, no problem, man, just to talk about your life, your career in pro wrestling, but also this very, very important documentary that I felt needed the story that needed to be told because just the fact that a lot of this vintage footage had never seen the light of day before. I
Right,
mean, think
right,
about this. Think about the WWE Vault right now that's on YouTube and how much traction it's getting for stuff that
right.
wasn't even on the network. I mean, there was one video that came out about a month or so ago. It was the backstage footage from when Kevin Nash beat Bob Backlund for the WWF Championship, and King Kong Bundy is giving him his hey, congrats,
Oh, get
champ,
out of here.
congrats.
Really?
And
That's
I
awesome.
and I commented if Instagram existed in 1994 because that's
Right.
exactly it looked like an Instagram reel or
Wow.
YouTube short. It really really did. So it was really
That's pretty
cool to
cool.
see that. So I'm envisioning based off what you've told me now that you've digitized a lot of this footage. I mean, the ECWA YouTube channel is going to be jumping in a little while where
Yeah.
people can really see a lot of this vintage footage for a lot of the legends that's coming in and out of our doors. Well, that does it for this week's edition of the D-Lew Podcast. Once again, I want to thank Ryan for stopping by and talking about all that he's doing with ECWA, and most importantly, all the hard work that he put into making this incredible documentary. And I urge all of you once again to stream it only on Prime Video. Subscribe to the D-Lew Podcast on all platforms, okay? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. You can get the audio and the video version of this on YouTube. Not only do you get the D-Lew Podcast, but you also get all of my music and music videos and also my actor reels. Most recently, I just found an episode of Brain Games featuring yours truly, which is now available on my YouTube channel. So if you can look up Derrick T. Lewis, the D-Lew Podcast, the real DT Lew, whatever it is, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you can get all of what I'm doing in all aspects of my career. Of course, there's social media. The D-Lew Podcast is on all social media platforms at the D-Lew Podcast. My social media on all platforms is at the real DT Lew, with the exception of Facebook, because it wants to be different. It's Derrick T. Lewis official page. Of course, my stores, Pro Wrestling Tees, is pwt.derricklewis.com. And of course, you can get all of the D-Lew podcast and Siete music merch over at shop.derricklewis.com. Where I'm going to get out of here, and as I always say, no matter what it is you do in life, always remember to make it count. See you next time.